and welcome to LSE Focus. It is pre-match build-up showtime for what might just be one of the biggest Merseyside derbies in years. It is the 237th time that these two sides have clashed. I don't know why that number always seems to come up. I guess it's just to highlight how long both of these teams have been pretty much at the very top of the English footballing pyramid and have therefore been pitched against each other so many times. But it's hard to remember a time when so much has been riding on it for both teams. Of course, looking back in recent years, there have been plenty of derbies that have felt like must-wins for Liverpool because of the positions they've been in, you know, fighting for top four places or even fighting for the title over the last couple of years, and it's felt like we simply have to get all the points from the game. But for Everton, it's often been mostly about stopping Liverpool. For them, whenever there's felt like there's been something riding on it, it's more been because of the fans wanting to set Liverpool back rather than Everton and the players and the coaching staff themselves trying to achieve any sort of goal. Whereas now, they've gone 4 for 4 at the start of the season. They are top of the table. As long as they avoid defeat this weekend, they will remain top of the table for another week as well. So for them, this is absolutely massive and probably their first big test of the season. I know they played Tottenham Hotspur on opening day, but it felt like Spurs was still, you know, finding their feet a little bit. That first week, or at least maybe even couple of weeks, is a little bit of a write-off in terms of reading too much into it form-wise, simply because of the short pre-season and the quick turnaround and everything like that. But since then, Everton have done reasonably well, but they haven't come up against a side of Liverpool's calibre, or at least the calibre that Liverpool seemed to be at before the Villa defeat happened, and that's why so much is riding on it for us as well. You know, if we'd beaten Aston Villa and gone 4 for 4 as well, you probably would have still had Liverpool as favourites for this and looked at this as the moment that Everton were probably going to fall down, drop their first points of the season and maybe start to drift away. But as it stands, they're 3 points ahead of Liverpool. They're top of the table. We are the ones playing catch up, and you know, if they win this game and we're 6 points behind them, that's a real problem for Liverpool. Then it actually starts to become an issue because there's ground to be made up there, and it will give Everton real momentum and belief that they can go toe-to-toe with every single team in the Premier League this season. And we don't want that. You know, we have enough trouble challenging Manchester City for titles year on year and the challenges that they pose without our local rivals suddenly getting their tails up and thinking that they can be chasing after us or, you know, racing away ahead of us as well. So it's an absolutely massive game for both teams, and it is such a shame. I know I say this pretty much every week, but for this one especially, that there's going to be no fans there, because if it was done under these circumstances with Everton 3 points ahead and the start they've had to the season and Liverpool looking to bounce back after a difficult defeat, then it would be an absolute cauldron in Goodison Park from all ends of the stands as well, and I'm sure that would contribute to the game as well. You know, you look at maybe the derby that happened at Goodison Park earlier on in the year, right at the start of the restart, and obviously there's the mitigating circumstance that the players have been off for several months, but there really wasn't the same intensity there. It always feels like even the 0-0s that we've had over recent years have been played at a certain pace. They haven't been bore draws. They've been exciting moments. There's been tension. Both teams look like they really want to take the game to the opposition, and that didn't really happen at Goodison. It felt like both teams were kind of happy to settle for a point. I don't think that's going to be the case. I certainly don't think that's going to be the case from the start in the game on Saturday. I think maybe if you get to about 70 minutes and it's 0-0 or 1-1 or 2-2 or whatever, both players maybe look at each other and, depending on how the game's going, say, you know what, we've got the beating of each other here. We're matched. Let's just let it play out. And, you know, that can sometimes happen because of the behind closed doors thing. You don't have the fans getting on your back to give you that second win that players often get in the last 15 minutes or so. It's been such an important weapon for Liverpool over the last few years under Jurgen Klopp, that ability to just go again right at the end of games and to suddenly launch attack after attack after attack, and it wears teams down, and it eventually normally leads to last minute winners and incredible moments and things that you didn't really think were possible, or at least you didn't think could be possible on such a regular basis. But because we've got the crowd pushing us forward, we're able to do it. So listen, maybe it plays into Liverpool's hands that the crowd aren't there normally in these Goodison derbies. It feels like the crowd actually stifles Everton a bit sometimes. You know, the weight of pressure, especially given that tomorrow will mark 10 years to the day since they last beat us in any competition, in any circumstances. And, you know, personally, I don't like that at all. I don't like the kind of omen that sends out, but I think it's fair to say it's been a fantastic decade for Liverpool and an awful decade for Everton, certainly from the Merseyside Derby perspective. And I think some of that is down to the fact that they don't play so well with their own fans. So maybe it plays into their hands being behind closed doors. It certainly seems to have been doing so far this season. or maybe it plays into Liverpool's hands not having to play in what would have been an absolute cauldron of an atmosphere at Goodison Park. But either way, it's certainly a new dynamic for this game. You know, Everton are not the team they've been in the last couple of seasons. Whenever we've gone to Goodison, and when they've come to Anfield as well, but they certainly seem to be more successful at it on their home turf, they generally look to stifle Liverpool. It becomes about taking points off of Liverpool, and that's what I said earlier about how for the fans it's about setting Liverpool back, you know, setting them back and stopping them from, you know, getting more points on their quest for top four or Premier League titles or stuff like that. Whereas now Everton will want to be on the front foot. They've got something to win out of this game, not just something to lose. So you imagine there'll be a new dynamic. They might take the game to Liverpool a little bit more. Hopefully we see goals. You know, there have been 3-0 draws at Goodison in a row now, and it's starting to get a little bit dull. Personally, I don't think that's going to happen this week. I'll come on to Everton a little bit more later on in the video, but I do think this new dynamic might actually work for us. The fact that we don't have to be the ones trying to break them down. We don't have to be the ones coming up against a staunch defence. We can actually do a little bit of that ourselves. And sometimes that has worked brilliantly under Jurgen Klopp. Looking back at the games against Man City in the European Cup a couple seasons ago, where we actually let them have a lot of the ball, soaked up pressure, made sure we won our battles in midfield, didn't get dominated in those key areas, and then absolutely blitzed them on the counter-attack. I'm not saying that Everton are going to, you know, push up as high as Manchester City do, because of course they haven't got quite the same calibre of players, and Pep Guardiola and Carlo Ancelotti are very different managers, but there will certainly be different opportunities available for our players than I think they normally do have at their feet at Goodison Park. So it's a fascinating prospect. It's a nerve-wracking one as well because of all the circumstances. It's obviously a huge opportunity for Everton. They will be looking at this as potentially their best opportunity in 10 years to beat Liverpool since they last did it, of course, with us being managed by Roy Hodgson. They'll want to stick the knife in and twist it after the 7-2 as well. They've got a blueprint there for how they can at least try and get at Liverpool, and I'm sure they will try and follow it. So it's probably going to be a hell of a game. I don't want to jinx it because Saturday 12:30s after international breaks can be a little bit dead, if we're being perfectly honest. Sometimes they take a while to get going, but given the nature of the game, it's a derby, it's a top of the table clash, it's Liverpool trying to redeem themselves, it's Everton trying to prove themselves. It's absolutely massive, and I'm sure it will be entertaining whatever happens on the pitch over the 90 minutes. So team news going into the game from a Liverpool perspective: Joel Matip is back fit. He's been training over the international break, which is absolutely fantastic to see. We were obviously pretty thin on the ground when it came to our centre-back options earlier on in the season because of the injury that Joel Matip had sustained. He's back. Sadio Mane and Thiago are also back out of self-isolation. They've been training a little bit as well. Jurgen Klopp spoke about how just because obviously they're isolating and quarantining and everything doesn't mean that they haven't been doing any exercise. They've been given their own personal programs, just like the players were given during the lockdown earlier on in the year before Project Restart and everything like that. And now, of course, they've been back in training since they've been released from their isolation. So there's hopefully not too many question marks about their fitness. It seemed like neither of them were too badly hit by the coronavirus either, so they shouldn't really need too much time to recover. So it'll be interesting to see how they come back in, but I don't think there's really any concerns about whether or not they're match fit. Unfortunately, Naby Keita is out. We didn't really receive a time scale on when he would be returning for Liverpool. Alisson Becker is of course also out, which is the massive blow for us going into this game. I think there is a little bit of a question about who's going to start in goal, but it's not going to be Alisson. Jurgen Klopp said he is progressing well, which means that maybe, you know, given the 4 to 6 week prognosis that we were given when he picked up the injury about maybe I think it was 2 weeks ago, because it was just before the international break. Hopefully, if he's progressing that well, that means 4 weeks rather than 6 weeks, but Jurgen doesn't want to give a time frame, so all we've got to do really is cross our fingers that we see him back sometime before the international break. But in the meantime, he's not going to be available for the derby on Saturday afternoon. So as for how I think Liverpool are actually going to line up, of course, the big question mark is over the man who will be taking his place between the sticks at Goodison Park for Liverpool at least. And of course, there are plenty of question marks over Jordan Pickford, but we'll come on to them later. Liverpool have their own problems in the goalkeeping department. Alisson Becker out. So ADRIAN is the kind of default option, but of course, after the display at Villa Park, there's maybe question marks over the team's faith in him, and I think that's the most important thing. You know, the manager can have as much faith in him as he wants and believe in him and want to keep playing him and play him into form, and the fans can believe that he can turn it round after such a difficult game against Aston Villa, but the team just don't seem confident. You know, they seem to not want to pass back to him, and that's fine. They can not do that. That's what happened at the start of last season. You know, when Adrian first arrived and it was clear that he wasn't suited to our style and he hadn't had time to adapt yet. That became very clear as soon as we had that game against Southampton where he gives the ball away to Danny Ings. We changed the way we played. We didn't pass back to the goalie as much. We played out from the back, and the centre halves played it to each other a little bit more, and we tried to reduce the amount of pressure that Adrian was put under, certainly with the ball at his feet. Maybe we have to go back to that. I think we completely lost our heads against Aston Villa. I think it's fair to say that everyone did on the pitch. You know, as soon as that Adrian error happens, no one really seems to know how to react, whether to go for the jugular, whether to sit back, whether to keep giving Adrian the ball and playing back into form, or whether to just hoof it long instead of playing back to him. And hopefully we've had some kind of reset and they've had time to think about how exactly they approach this problem. You know, Jurgen Klopp is not just going to ignore it. He's not going to throw Adrian out onto that pitch as if nothing ever happened. He is going to have been speaking to all the players about how we avoid errors like the one that leads to the first Aston Villa goal happening again. So it's entirely possible that we do see Adrian starting between the sticks for that reason. There is also the possibility of Kevin Kelleher, the youth goalkeeper. I think people are now asking if we've got him around and we're keeping him around because John Achterberg, the goalie coach, has said he wants 3, you know, good goalkeepers at Liverpool, and that is Alisson, Adrian, Kevin Kelleher at the moment, and that's why they haven't allowed Kevin Kelleher to leave on loan or anything like that. But if he is good, if he's good enough to be part of that group of 3, then surely when Adrian's not performing and Alisson's unavailable, he's got to get minutes. If he's not getting minutes now, it's kind of like, well, apart from League Cup matches and dead rubber games and stuff like that, when is he actually going to get a chance in the Liverpool shirt? And of course, we have got a congested fixture list coming up now. You know, between now and the next international break, and even after it as well, we play weekend, midweek, and it's Premier League, Champions League, Premier League, Champions League. So they're big games. There's room to rotate there. We can go back, or at least until Alisson returns, we can go back to that system we had a few years ago of having a league goalie and a cup goalie, and looking at horses for courses and thinking, well, which goalies' attributes suit those European games and which goalies are more suited to the hustle and bustle of the Premier League, where they're maybe going to be challenged physically a little bit more and maybe put under a bit more pressure on the ball. So maybe we go for something like that. We have, of course, also signed Marcelo Pitaluga. I think I pronounced that right, who is a Brazilian goalkeeper, seems to be coming through in the mould of Alisson Becker. So maybe that's with a view to one of Adrian or Kevin Kelleher being dropped. It will certainly be interesting to see what kind of role Pitaluga plays over the next few weeks, whether he appears on the bench, you know, as the next choice understudy, whether he actually takes his place as the number 1 in any of these games. I wouldn't be surprised if Liverpool do a bit of rotating in the goalkeeping department, because of course if there's question marks over Adrian as a backup, you don't want to go forward with him being the unquestioned backup. You maybe want to look into it and see, well, maybe this Pitaluga fella could be decent as an understudy to Alisson Becker, and unless we give him games, we're never really going to find out. And ideally you'd want to give him games now when he's got the opportunity and Alisson Becker isn't available. So I would like to see some of this Pitaluga. I've seen a tiny bit of him in training, and what I have seen looks good, but you know, the club's never going to put out clips of him, you know, letting bobbling balls go under him and coming for crosses and flapping at them or anything like that. They're obviously not going to do that. They're going to put out the clips of him making Hollywood saves and everything like that, and everyone giving him a round of applause, and that's what we've seen so far. Hopefully we can see some of that in games as well. Personally, I'd quite like to see him. I'd quite like to see Kelleher. I don't really mind seeing Adrian. I'm just interested to see what Jurgen Klopp does. But I think for now, he probably sticks to his guns. He sticks with Adrian, and we see if we can adapt the way we played to go back to what we were doing at the start of last season, because to be honest, that kind of worked. We won every single game while he was there. We only kept 1 clean sheet, of course, but I think it's fair to say Adrian didn't disgrace himself in that stage of games. Not to say he's disgraced himself recently, but he's certainly lost some of the aura about him that he had at first in Liverpool shirt. So I think he will start the game. Ahead of him, I think you go with Virgil van Dijk and Joel Matip coming back into the side. Of course, Joe Gomez did not have a great game against Aston Villa, and normally Jurgen Klopp likes to play players back into form. You rarely see him. Sometimes he takes players off early for a substitution if they're not playing well, but he rarely bombs them out the side afterwards. He rarely takes them out and says, sorry lad, but you're just having a mare and we're not keeping you in the team. That just doesn't really happen at Jurgen Klopp's Liverpool. He wants them to get back on the pitch and prove themselves, but given the amount of games we're going to play and the injury records of Joel Matip and Joe Gomez, I think there's going to have to be some rotation between the two of them, and Virgil van Dijk might have to come out for a couple of games here and there, and Fabinho might actually end up dropping in as well. Of course, with the return of Thiago, we've got a couple more midfield options, which frees up Fabinho to play in the back line a little bit more. So I don't think Joe Gomez is necessarily going to start this game purely based on a horses for courses approach. You know, Joel Matip is good in the air. He's a real threat, and both going forward and defensively. And of course, Everton have got Calvert-Lewin as a real threat aerially. So hopefully Joel Matip can deal with that. So I think he will start alongside Virgil van Dijk for this game. At least either side of them, I think it's going to be Andrew Robertson and Trent Alexander-Arnold as your fullbacks. I think the midfield for me is going to be very much informed by what happened at Aston Villa. So first of all, I think Henderson has to come back in. You know, he got his minutes for England, which I think the coaching staff are very happy about. They spoke about it publicly that they actually wanted to see him play for England in the international break, because that allows him to get his match fitness and his sharpness back after the injury layoff ready, so that when the international break ends and he comes back for Liverpool, he's ready to actually play competitive football for up to 90 minutes. So I think Jordan Henderson was a huge miss against Aston Villa, so I think he absolutely has to come back into the side. I would also quite like to see James Milner, partially because this game kind of suits him. You know, if it's going to be high energy, blood and thunder, I know it looks like maybe he's lost half a yard of pace or something like that. Certainly looking back at the Community Shield match, which is a little bit harsh, of course, because it was right at the start of the season and no one's going to be absolutely 100%. But he didn't quite look like the James Milner that we've maybe seen in the past in a Liverpool shirt. I don't want to snap to any judgments, which is another reason that I'd love to see him in this game. But in the past, he's been absolutely fantastic in these games where it's all about work rate, all about management, all about leadership as well. That's what was really missing from the Liverpool side against Aston Villa. So getting your captain and your vice captain on the pitch next to each other in midfield, talking their teammates through the game, keeping them honest, keeping them hardworking, I think that's what Liverpool really need to make sure they turn things around after the Villa defeat. So I would like to see James Milner in midfield, and of course I want to see Thiago, and I think he's going to start Thiago. I think he's got to play in this game. You know, he was fantastic when he came on for those 45 minutes against Chelsea. We all know his quality. He is one of, if not the best midfielder in the world, and he's got a chance to really stake a claim to be the best midfielder in the world by absolutely running the show in the Premier League. And what better game to do it in than a derby match against the league leaders? You know, if Thiago can come in and dominate this game, or at least, you know, help them in what is going to be a very highly contested midfield, I'm sure, in this match. He has that special something that you feel like might just give Liverpool the edge. He is world class. He's probably going to be the best midfielder on the pitch if he plays, not by a lot. You know, Jordan Henderson, I admire. James Rodriguez is in great form for Everton at the moment. They've got a great midfield unit. We've got a great midfield unit, but he just has a little bit more of everything. He intercepts brilliantly. He closes down spaces. He finds passes that other people doesn't see. He moves. He positions himself fantastically. Everything he does has just what seems like a little bit extra, that star quality, something you can't really pin down, but that just makes watching him an absolute joy and makes him an absolute nightmare for opponents to deal with. So I think he will be in midfield alongside Henderson and James Milner. Then the front three, I think he's going to go for the usual suspects. I know Firmino's coming back late, of course, having played on Wednesday night for Brazil and then having to make the long flight back from South America. Jurgen Klopp spoke about how all the players have been flown back on private jets by themselves and everything to try and reduce COVID exposure, so he should be fine on that front. But of course, there are question marks about fitness, but it looks like he's played himself back into form. He hasn't had the best start to the season, certainly in front of goal. He hasn't exactly been banging them in. He hasn't got a single goal all season, but he was banging them in for Brazil. He was getting goals, getting assists, performing really well as the tip of an attack as well. You know, he wasn't playing as a number 10. He was playing as a number 9 in that Brazil system with all the other players playing off him, and he did incredibly well. So hopefully he's played himself back into form. And of course, he was so useful to Liverpool in these big away games last season. You know, being able to get those big late goals, winning goals, really important goals that turn the tides of games. So if we're going to be up against it, I'd want Roberto Firmino on the pitch to try and get an important goal that could turn things around for Liverpool. And of course, Mo Salah as well is just one goal away from bringing up a century for Liverpool. So it'd be fantastic to see him get on the score sheet as well. But I think certainly from the start, you go with Salah, Firmino and Mane, and then you've got the options there. You know, Jota is in fantastic form, had an absolute blinder of an international break with Portugal. I believe the last game he played, he scored 2 and assisted 1 as well, which is, you know, fantastic. Minamino, of course, gives us a great option. He seems to really be finding his feet at Liverpool. Divock Origi is the scourge of Everton. I'm sure if the game is tight with 20 minutes or 15 minutes to go and we bring him on, the psychological impact of that alone could be a blow for Everton. You know, knowing what he's done to them in the past could put them on the back foot, could unsettle them, and could lead to us getting important goals. So the options are there. Of course, you've got Xherdan Shaqiri as well, who stayed after a potential move away during the transfer window. So we got the options there, but I do think we should start with the recognised front three. So taking a quick look at Everton then, obviously, as has been mentioned quite a few times on this video, because it is something of a blue elephant in the room, they're good. They are actually good for once. You know, we've had plenty of laughs about Everton over the years, culminating in that derby match in the Cup last season. I think, you know, Jurgen Klopp had done everything he could to lose a game against Everton, and he finally cracked and threw out the under-23s. And they still ended up winning the game, and they still ended up, you know, apart from the early stages of the game, outclassing Everton. It looked like a team that had a real psychological block, and maybe that's a boost for Liverpool, because Everton should have won that game. On paper, they were the better side. And they had Carlo Ancelotti as their manager, so there was plenty going for them. That was a huge opportunity for them, but it felt like suddenly the block just appeared. They started well, but ADRIAN makes a couple of saves, and it almost feels like they get in their own heads and think, oh God, it's happening again. And that's a huge opportunity. That's something that Liverpool need to try and grasp in this game. Of course, it is different with the fans not in the stadium, but if Liverpool can get on top early on in the game, if they can put Everton under pressure, you imagine that they might start to think that everything they've done so far this season has all been built on sand. And I'm not saying that, you know, their heads will fall off and they'll lose every game and get relegated, but certainly looking at this match, they might start to worry that, you know, all of that kind of stuff disappears when you play Liverpool. And of course, they've got different personnel in there. You know, Calvert-Lewin is pretty fresh new blood. Richarlison hasn't necessarily been bad against Liverpool. I'm pretty sure he's bagged at least a couple of goals against us. I remember he got one at Anfield in the 5-2 last season. James Rodriguez, of course, world-class player. He's probably not going to be that scared of Liverpool, if we be honest. And they've completely remodelled their midfield as well. And that's what's going to be really interesting. That's why I talked quite a bit about the midfield that I thought was going to start the game, and why I think Jurgen Klopp has got to get it absolutely right. And it's no coincidence really that it's a completely different midfield from the one that started against Villa. Every player that started at Villa Park, I think, will probably drop to the bench or be moved somewhere else around the team in some capacity. Of course, Keita not available, but Gini Wijnaldum didn't play well, and Fabinho had a little bit of an off one as well. But I do think it's also horses for courses as well. And looking at this game, that's where the match is going to be won and lost. I know Calvert-Lewin is fantastic, of course, and is dominant in the air, and I think that's why I've gone for Van Dijk and Matip as the centre-back partnership, because I think both of them combined should be able to deal with Calvert-Lewin. And maybe we do see Fabinho in the number 6 role, because he deals very well with those balls over the top as well. But it's not necessarily balls over the top in a sense of they lump it to Calvert-Lewin and he wins knockdowns or stuff like that. He's the last touch before it goes in. It's not lumping it. It's James Rodriguez finding space, dragging players out into difficult areas, and then playing beautiful balls in that Calvert-Lewin can then head home to get Everton the goals. So we've got to be very, very aware of that. Interestingly, though, they are defensively not that great. You know, people kind of have Carlo Ancelotti down as a great defensive manager, but so far this season they've been a bit leaky. The only clean sheet they kept was against Spurs, and then of course they conceded 2 to West Brom, quite their shabby goals as well. They conceded a shabby one against Crystal Palace. They conceded a couple against Brighton, and one of the other elephants in the room, albeit an elephant with slightly shorter limbs, if we're being honest, is Jordan Pickford, who is probably responsible for at least half of the goals that Everton have conceded so far. I do think something that Jurgen Klopp seemed to touch upon in his press conference, and it's been discussed a lot, is the lack of focus that comes with the crowds not being in the stadium. You know, the crowds keep the players honest. They get on their backs, and they make them make sure that they are focused at all times. And also kind of, you know a bit more about what's going on around you because of the crowd. You know when you're under pressure because the crowd will react to it. You know when you're doing well because the crowd will react to it. And they haven't really got those triggers that for the players that kind of make the game flow a little bit better. And we end up with these very odd rhythms, and you get odd goals as a result because players aren't quite as switched on. And Jordan Pickford, I mean, the guy seems to be suffering. He didn't perform well for England over the international break either. And that is something for Liverpool to get out, set pieces. While Everton are good at them going forward, Calvert-Lewin is great in the air. Yerry Mina is another fantastic player coming up for corners and stuff like that. They're quite weak at defending them. They tend to lapse. Jordan Pickford doesn't seem to inspire much confidence in his back line, and that's another reason I want Joel Matip in the side as well, because Gomez, good at defending set pieces, doesn't attack them very well, hasn't got a single goal in a Liverpool shirt, and maybe he's doing stuff off the ball, dragging defenders and stuff like that, but Joel Matip scores headers. Virgil van Dijk scores headers. Both of those players are problems in the air on set pieces, and I think given how tight this game might end up being, it's very much one of the Merseyside derbies of old. It feels like like a classic 80s matchup where it's two real, not necessarily heavyweights, because, you know, I don't want to get ahead of myself. Everton it's 4 games in. Yes, they've won all 4 of them, but we can't be getting too silly about it. But it's 2 teams that are banging form going up against each other. It's a blockbuster match, and it could go right to the wire, and as a result, set pieces could end up being the decider. Another reason that I think we might want to see Divock Origi at some point as well. But either way, I'm sure it'll be a fantastic game. I'm sure it's going to be difficult for us to watch as Liverpool fans. It will be a hell of a nail-biter, but hopefully, fingers crossed, we come out of it the other end with a decent result. I know some people are potentially happy with a draw. I think if we were level on points with Everton, I probably would have taken a draw. Now we've lost ground on them, and of course, I'm also looking over our shoulder against Man City. You know, that game against Villa was an opportunity to go 5 points clear of them. We've blown that opportunity now. I know they play Arsenal this weekend, which is no easy game, as we know, and as they'll know as well. So there's a potential to gain some ground on them again there. And because of those reasons, I think we have to win. I think we do really need a win. We need to turn around after that game against Aston Villa as well, to remind everyone what Liverpool are about and to get ourselves back on track and push back towards the top of that Premier League table. So I want a win. Let me know what you'd be happy with and how exactly you think it's going to go down in the comments below. Apart from that, that is all for today's video. Thank you guys very, very much for watching. As always, don't forget to hit that like button down there if you enjoyed the video. Hit that subscribe button there if you're new around here. Check out some of the other videos that have been out on the channel in the past. Don't forget to follow at LFC Focus TV on Twitter, and I'll be back again very soon. Until then, bye for now.